A German scout, hidden in a tree line, watches an entire American armored division roll into position. Tanks, trucks, artillery, even the tired radio chatter of soldiers complaining about the cold. He reports it up the chain. None of it is real. There is no armored division. There isn't a single real tank in the field. This is the story of the strangest unit the United States Army ever fielded. 1,100 artists, actors, and sound engineers who almost never fired a shot, and who historians credit with saving thousands of American lives. For over 50 years, the men who did it were forbidden to tell anyone, not their commanders afterward, not their wives, not their own children, what they had actually done in the war. One of them, asked for half a century what his job was, always gave the same answer: "I blew up tanks." He wasn't lying. He just wasn't allowed to say the tanks were made of rubber. They called themselves the Ghost Army. Officially, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, activated in January 1944, recruited almost entirely out of art schools and advertising agencies. A young painter named Ellsworth Kelly was in it, years before he became one of America's most influential artists. So was a soldier named Bill Blass, who'd go on to become one of America's biggest fashion designers. Their officers didn't want soldiers who simply followed orders well. They wanted people who could lie beautifully. Their weapon was illusion, built in 4 parts. A battalion that inflated fake tanks, trucks, and artillery out of rubber. A decoy of a 30-ton Sherman tank that weighed just 93 pounds and that 4 men could carry by hand. A radio unit that studied a real division's transmission habits down to each individual operator's personal Morse code rhythm, then faked it. A sonic company that recorded real tank columns and played the sound back through half-track mounted speakers loud enough to carry 15 miles. And a small team of actors who impersonated actual army officers right down to hand-sewn counterfeit patches and simply talked loudly in cafes where the wrong ears might be listening. One officer wrote a memo demanding the unit be run like professional theater. Proper scenery, props, costumes, principals, extras, dialogue, and sound effects. He meant it literally. By September 1944, General Patton's Third Army was racing across France so fast it tore open its own front line, a gap roughly 25 miles wide, defended by almost nothing. If German forces found it, they could pour straight through toward Patton's exposed flank. The Ghost Army was sent to plug it. 500 lightly armed men, pretending to be an entire 8,000-man armored division. They built a dozen inflatable tanks in the woods, struck them again within a day, after a local civilian wandered too close. They painted trucks with a real armored division's insignia and briefed every soldier on that division's history, so the cover story would hold under questioning. 10 radios ran a fake command network, perfectly synced with real units nearby. Soldiers in borrowed uniforms sat in Luxembourg cafes, dropping loud, deliberate details about their division's movements. And in the boldest touch, 2 officers, one playing a major general, the other his aide, rolled into a Luxembourg town in a marked jeep convoy and liberated a bottle of wine from a tavern run by a suspected collaborator. Pure theater performed live, a few miles from German patrols. It worked. German intelligence reported everything from an armored combat command to several divisions, sitting in a gap that, in reality, held a few hundred men and a handful of rubber tanks. The line held for 8 days until real reinforcements finally arrived. Their masterpiece came 6 months later on the Rhine. In March 1945, nearly the entire unit, close to 1,000 men, impersonated 2 full divisions, roughly 40,000 real soldiers, to hide exactly where the actual American crossing would happen. Over 600 inflatable vehicles, sonic trucks broadcasting the sound of pontoon bridges being hammered together all night, every night. A fake radio network running around the clock for two divisions that weren't there. Days before it began, German artillery found the decoy position anyway. Captain Thomas Wells was killed in his jeep. Staff Sergeant George Peddle died when his radio truck convoy was shelled. The illusion had a price, and these two men paid it, so that 10 miles north, the real crossing could happen against far weaker resistance. Afterward, American officers recovered a captured German map. It showed the enemy's entire picture of the battlefield, and the enemy had drawn it almost exactly the way the Ghost Army wanted them to. The real division wasn't on the map at all. They'd lost it completely. The unit's own post-war estimate is that they may have saved between 15 and 30,000 American lives. Historians still can't verify exactly how that number was calculated. And even the men who lived it were careful with the credit. Veteran Bernie Bluestein put it simply, decades later, "Even if we saved the life of one man, that would have been an accomplishment." When the war ended, the army made a decision: bury it completely, in case the trick was ever needed again. Records were sealed. Soldiers were ordered plainly to never speak of what they'd done, and most of them didn't, for the rest of their working lives. Some carried the secret to their graves without ever telling their own families. The files weren't opened until 1996, more than 50 years later. Congress didn't approve a gold medal for the unit until 2022, and didn't actually hand one over until March of 2024, because by then there was almost no one left to receive it. Of the roughly 1,100 men who served, only 7 were still alive. Only 3 were healthy enough to make the trip to Washington. One of them, Bernie Bluestein, stood in the Capitol at 100 years old and said simply, "I'm happy about all this glory, but it's not me. I grew up in a poor family." He died earlier this year at 102, one of the last men on Earth who actually knew what it felt like to convince an army that a lie was real.